I've nearly lost my voice. I've only done 3 panels. I don't know how Sonia's.
I hope we're the most special one out of all your panel discussions.
Yeah. Save the best till last, shall we?
Yes.
I feel as though Tripta should be here. Tripta has been on every panel that I've done so far, so I feel a bit lost. No, so it's good. This is the final session, I think, today, which is nice. And so it's 2:00 now. This session should run till probably about 5:30, something like that. So only got 3.5 hours to fill.
Yeah.
We'll get some coffee.
Yeah, we'll get some coffee. Yeah,
Get your coffee, Ivy. Yeah.
That's it. So we're going to talk about the future of conversational AI, which we've alluded to a little bit, and we'll get into that discussion at the moment. I've got Smriti Garga from Sky. We have Somnath Biswas from TotalJobs and Mike Hales from BT. Maybe it might be nice to begin. Tell us a little bit about yourself. We'll start with you, Smriti. Maybe it's a little bit about yourself and what you've been working on at Sky.
Yeah, sure. So I'm currently a senior product manager at Sky. I'm working on personalization and content discovery on the Sky Sports app. Previously, I worked as a consultant, kind of combining design thinking and conversational UI for telecommunications clients.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. My name is Somnath. I'm head of product for Conversations in TotalJobs. We are essentially trying to see if Conversations is a better way to kind of find jobs. Finding jobs is anyways a very emotional thing, so we're basically trying to explore with that mode. Prior to this, I think for the past 6 years, I've been working on NLP products, including my own startup, and then I've kind of worked on job tech, worked on clinical research, retail, and a couple of other use cases. Been in the industry for now nearly 20 years now, so seeing the next wave come up now, but it's good to be here.
Perfect position to speak about the future.
Yeah. No pressure. Yeah.
No pressure. But we're all looking to you for some tremendous insights. Go on, Mike.
I'm Mike. I've been a product owner with BT for about 6 months now. I've been in the conversational AI space for about 6 or 7 years, working with Vodafone previously, building the Toby bot, and then with BT now, I'm really looking to move it to the next level. So moving it from being straightforward self-service journeys through to actually doing things as part of the conversation. So integrating into the back-end systems and hopefully building conversations where margins and things are relatively simple.
Nice. As we kind of go through this, if you've got any questions, feel free to stick your hand up, and at any point in time, don't save them until the end, at any point in time, feel free just to shout out. Curious then, maybe we'll start with something that could be a bit high level, and we'll get into the detail as we kind of progress. But what are some of the things, Smriti, that have been sort of positive signs for you over the last few years of working in this space, that things are heading in a positive direction? What are some of either the trends or advancements, things that have been really exciting you over the last kind of couple of years or so?
Well, first of all, I think it's usage, like users actually finally being more comfortable with kind of a conversational interface. I think there was a bit of reticence for many years, but now it's becoming more mainstream. It's entering homes a lot more common. It's almost on every platform. So if users use it, we know how to leverage it better and optimize it. So we need that user data to actually make the experience more effective, because that's our input for better output. So for me, I think it's the user side, the fact that users have finally started really using it in an organic way.
Has the adoption been, so there's a few different ways of thinking about it, isn't there? Like for some, Amazon Alexa was going to be the thing that kicked this whole thing off, and like there's going to be this killer skill that's everyone's going to then just jump on Alexa and stuff like that. For others, it's kind of like, someone was talking to me the other day about like, when is the contact center going to really grab hold of this and kind of run with it? Is there sort of like do you think that sort of, has there been any particular thing that's been encouraging as far as adoption's concerned? What are some of the things that you've noticed that have been sort of, more readily adopted?
I think, obviously, like conversational AI, we would hope for a very clean two-way dialogue, and I think we're not totally there yet. But if we consider kind of the first phase, which is just I ask a question and a human asks a question and robot answers, I think Siri has kind of done that a really good job. Even if it's just to set timers, it's still at least people are getting more comfortable that they have confidence that they will get the right action from what they've triggered.
Yeah. Interesting. What about you, Somnath? What are some of the things over the last few years that have kind of excited you as far as progress?
I think just building on the point that Smriti mentioned, I think it's essentially been a two-way street as well. I guess the pandemic kind of played a factor in that, because suddenly the companies had to kind of move away from brick and mortar. There was more focus on online. And then when you're talking about online, then suddenly do you have the capacity for it? There's a cost factor to it. So there's willingness to try and experiment, because that seemed like a good option. Fact that you now basically have the younger generation as well, who's basically, as Smriti mentioned, probably more open to using a bot compared to the traditional channels. And then I guess the third factor would be the advancement that has happened in terms of the large language models, in terms of the transformer models, because now with the transformer models coming in, you are less dependent on labeled data. A large part of it is the unsupervised part of it, and the fine tuning is where you need the labeled data. So I think it's a combination of factors, which, as is always the case, it's never just one thing. So it's basically a combination of factors which probably is pushing this forward in my mind.
What about you, Mike?
I think that I'd agree with a lot of that. I think there's been a lot of take-up and use of what I call phase one bots, so those sort of simple bots that answer questions. And I think that people are certainly more ready to accept them and certainly engage with them. I think they're getting very savvy very quickly about them. They understand, okay, it can deal with simple questions, but I can always just jump to a human if I have anything more sophisticated. And I think the other thing that's exciting me is the sort of technology that's coming through. You mentioned a couple of languages that earlier on today, and I'm certainly looking for when we can move from being so heavily scripted and almost like, does it fit into this box? Right, there's this response to, okay, they're asking about this, therefore it can respond in this sort of way. Within, certain parameters and controls, but certainly a lot more of an automated response rather than okay, I'll pick script 3 as the line I
Model-driven rather than rules-driven.
Correct, yeah.
Yeah. Are you familiar with Raz's kind of like levels of conversational AI? Have you come across that?
I don't think so.
No, there's some people. We've got some Raza people at the back there. Are you all familiar with your own? With that? I was thinking in my mind now. I was thinking I'm going to put these two on the spot here if they haven't been doing the. Yeah, you are. Do you want to? Have you got a mic somewhere? Do you want to kind of give us? I can give a breakdown, but it's nice to hear kind of. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's interesting to think of conversational AI heading in that.
Yeah. I think that's essentially the point that you were mentioning, where it's basically purely from FAQ to basically getting a task done, and then I think someone in the audience mentioned where it's proactively even coming. So that's probably this. I don't know. I thought there were 3 stages. Maybe there are 5, but maybe the 5th stage is where it's basically proactively kind of engaging with you as well. Is that? From one. Nice.
I actually had to work on something like that, like the maturity levels of conversational AI. And it was so interesting because the conversations we have go in such different directions, right? There's so much that can mature. So like the way I kind of made sense out of it, for me at least, was on 3 pillars. Mm-hmm. So the first is interaction. So, is it chat? Is it voice? Is it an avatar? Is it monolingual, multilingual? Is it human to bot, bot to human, bot to bot, as we were talking before? Then there's integration, and then that's when the whole back-end integration starts. What is it actually connected to? How much do you know about myself? And then there's a side of when I'm talking to this bot, are they taking me somewhere else, or am I staying within the interface to complete my tasks as well? So that's the integration side. And then there's the intelligence side. And the intelligence side is, is it a one-way dialogue? Is it two-way dialogue? Is it is there a sentiment analysis? Does it understand my needs? And for me, that has helped a lot. This three pillar of intelligence, integration, and interaction, because I think no bot will be at one maturity level for all. So some will kind of go really high on interaction, but really low on intelligence, or really high on intelligence, but really low on integration. So it's kind of like almost a spider diagram that you want to create on these kinds of pillars.
It's one of the things of that kind of model as you get to the latter stage of it, which is really interesting, is how, so in the early stages, which you kind of alluded to, which is the FAQ stuff, it's all explicit requests. The user knows exactly what they want and they're asking for it. And the job really for conversational AI engineers and designers is to figure out how you can train a model so that you can really understand people. As it starts moving further down that kind of scale, you get towards a conversational assistant which actually can help a user figure out what it is that they need. Mm-hmm. And there's a really good example from the OneReach team where they kind of give this example of someone calls up. So do you know how, like, in the UK we've got the hippo bags? Hippo bags, yeah. You're not familiar with hippo bags? I was only recently become familiar with hippo bags when I was trying to book a skip and I found these hippo bags. So what they are, basically, you would go to somewhere like B&Q, Block and Quail, and you would get this bag, right, massive bag, and it's like the size of a skip. You put all your rubbish in there and stuff. Yeah. You have all the size of a hippo, yeah. Put all your rubbish in there, and then all you do is go online whenever you want it to get collected, and they'll come and collect it. Mm-hmm. And so there's this example of, they're in the US as well, I can't remember what they call them, they're not hippo bags, elephant bags or something like that. And so the use case there is that someone calls up and they have a question which is, can I put this stuff in this, like plasterboard, can I put plasterboard in this thing? And having the intelligence to recognize that it's a Friday evening and they've booked a collection already for Saturday, maybe they're not ready to collect it. Mm-hmm. And therefore prompting them and saying, sounds like you might still have some work to do. Do you want me to rebook the collection? So that's kind of getting to the phase where it's beyond just you tell me what you want and I'll deliver it, and also getting to the point of being able to understand what people might need. Yeah. It's kind of being proactive, but not strictly kind of thing. I'm curious about, like, what do you think? We've got a question over here, if we can get a mic there, which we'll get to in a second. Curious about what you think some of the challenges are right now in order to get to a situation where that's more common. Is it a technology challenge? Is it a design thinking challenge? Like, what are some of the challenges that you observe at the moment? Maybe Somnath, you look like you're pondering.
No, I was thinking about it. I think it probably links to the point that we were talking about earlier. It's a function of two aspects to it. It's, do you have the data, and how well can you basically use that? So I think someone earlier was talking about, do you understand the context part of it? And that's just one signal in terms of you, as you kind of go through the conversation, you're basically filling up the slots and okay, this person is at this stage, and that's one part of it. But then as an enterprise, you have more data about the company in terms of just basic information without even knowing the person, as you said, Friday evening, blah, 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 those kind of things. And you can bring in those insights, but it's a function of how much of a rules-driven orchestration can you do with that? Because at some point of time, it'll become too tenuous to kind of even maintain it and then bring in those. And that's where I think the move towards where we're talking about model-driven, next best action engine kind of a approach, I think that's probably where it is heading towards. We certainly basically are kind of thinking in those lines. We are way, way far away from that. But I think the answer probably lies in that realm in terms of having access to the quality signals, because not all signal is quality, so having access to the quality signal, but being able to kind of almost take a model-driven approach rather than a rules-driven. You will start off with rules-driven, and then that'll kind of give you a sense whether your users really are appreciating it or not. But then at some point of time, it'll have to become a model-driven kind of a thing to it. So that's where I think, that's what I was pondering about.
Yeah.
Well, I think the other thing is you're going to get quickly to a stage where actually you're not necessarily doing everything through your bot. You're probably, as a business, going to have multiple different systems doing multiple different types of tasks. And the challenge is actually going to be to weave those things together so that you get a type of, maybe it's a proactive or a reactive inquiry, and then you route it accordingly, and then you get the things to hand over. And then it's all about, okay, well, what is the persona? What is the voice of this thing? So that the customer doesn't get a sense of, I'm being shuffled around here. It's just getting, oh, okay, I'm getting an answer to the question I asked, you know. And the proactive thing is fascinating because, yeah, I mean, I've been in the telco space for a long time, and there are a number of things that are going to come up. You know if someone gets a broadband installation, the next call is going to be, hey, my Wi-Fi is not working, you know. And some of them can get a bit extreme. I remember sitting on a call with Vodafone where the poor agent was on the call for 40-odd minutes trying to figure out what was going on. And it was only because the customer actually mentioned they were doing some decorating. And the agent went, have you put a ladder up? And they said, yes. They said, try taking your ladder down. Of course, they put this big aluminium ladder up, which just sucks all the Wi-Fi in. So as soon as they put the ladder down,
nice.
Wi-Fi was good to go.
That's
Now,
domain
trying
knowledge.
to build that into a conversational AI,
Yeah.
no.
Yeah. That's a very good tip.
Yeah.
Don't put ladders up on your Wi-Fi.
That's
Smriti,
domain knowledge.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's quite interesting. I think if we start thinking about action reaction and forget about the bot interface and stuff. I don't know if any of you have used the recap functionality that SkyQ has, but basically when you're entering a football match kind of mid-game, we know that users will want to know what happened until now. So we've kind of, through like machine learning, have basically created an ML-driven highlights clip. So we proactively say, why don't you watch the highlights clip So on one side, it kind of makes me think as well, this ML-driven highlights clip is obviously taking goals, kind of main key events, but sometimes what really makes a sports event like really, emotional or important is a thing that isn't really a big event, like a goal, but it's like a hug between, the coach and a player, or the frustration of a player. And those scenes never show up in our ML-driven highlights. So I think it goes back to what you were saying around context and making sure actually we get better at the human side. So yeah, I think even the intent of the words, the meaning of the words, right now we still take very much words as they are. Another feature that we've been working on the Sky Sports app is recommending articles based on the article you're at. And at the moment, we take the summary of the article, and it's actually in Italian. So we just take words in the summary, but we have no idea what those words mean. And then we'll recommend articles that also have those words. So if you're talking about, I don't know if I can use this, but the death of a player, for example, does it really matter to recommend other deaths of players? That was a really morbid example. Sorry.
Negative news sells.
True.
Definitely. The guy over here had a question. I don't know if we've got a microphone available. You had a very good question last time, so no pressure.
Smriti is going to take this one.
I hope you guys can hear me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, my main question is, so you've got, personal assistants like Siri and Alexa, right? And then you've got these specifically catered bots that are really good at dealing with whatever company they're attached to, right? At what point do you think we're going to have a seamless interaction where it says, all right, look, I'm going to hand you over to Sky's channel.
Yeah.
And then Sky's like, all right, I'm done with my stuff now. I'm going to hand you back over to your personal assistant. And then it feels, so the thing that I was thinking about was, when you have like a new family member, like a sister-in-law or someone in the house, that's just newly arrived to the house, you still haven't gotten used to them, right? Later down the line, it becomes more a bit more natural, right?
Yeah.
So, like I'm thinking about a situation where I'm just sitting down on my computer, and in the background I tell Alexa, like, hey, I need to modify my Sky subscription, and then it recognizes that it's going to Sky. I don't know how fast that's going to be, but
Yeah.
a seamless interaction back, as if why would you remove
Yeah. Of course, yeah. So for those that might not have heard, what was your name, sorry? Hasim. Hasim was asking, you've got capabilities like, I don't know, a chatbot or assistant that Sky might have, or that Vodafone might have, another Vodafone team are here, that does very specific stuff for a business. But then you've got kind of like a broad assistant, like Alexa, Siri, Google Assistant, that is there to do very broad tasks. What is stopping, or is there an opportunity, or what the challenge is, and is this the future whereby you can just ask something like Siri to not cancel your Sky subscription? We wouldn't want to do that, would we? To upgrade your Sky
Absolutely.
then it would hand you straight over to the Sky bot. The same thing for Vodafone. So what are some of the kind of challenges, limitations of, I suppose, what's known as the interoperability of these various assistants? I don't know if you've got any thoughts, Smriti. Is that something you've thought about at Sky?
I'll be honest. I feel like that sounds like a massive, massive, massive collaboration work that, I'm not sure we could get to. Like, even Sky is a massive organization with multiple products, and we're still working toward, and with Comcast as well, if you think about, that side as well, there's a lot we can still do within our own products to have that seamless integration. And it just as an example, it makes me think, what if I'm using LinkedIn and I want to create a vertical video? So actually, it's like LinkedIn is sending me to TikTok to create that vertical video so that I can post it on LinkedIn. That's not going to happen, right? So for me, it almost makes me think as well, do we want to go in that direction?
What do you reckon, Somnath?
So I was thinking about it. I guess it's probably already happening, is it not, with the Alexa skills thing, where we basically, it's your interface is Alexa, but ultimately you as an enterprise can publish your skill, and it's basically making that call. So there are two ways of that happening. One is, there's a skill getting published and it's almost like a handoff. The second thing is probably where you expose your endpoints to the interface bot, and then ultimately it's not handing off, but it's basically taking care of it. So in terms of, okay, I like this program, and then suddenly Alexa says, hey, I'm going to basically, I can upgrade your Sky, this thing to a new package, and then you can do that. In that case, it's not really handing off, but it knows that this information is there, and then it can do that. So you will, if the question is, will there be some kind of a consolidation happening? I'm definitely sure about that, because there are only so many touch points that you have with the customer, and the prevalent touch points will probably be the ones which will kind of be the interfaces. And then how that integration happens is, as Smriti mentioned, it's a collaboration exercise, or how you go about it. But I think that's the way it's going to go into the future anyways.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point, actually. I think you can pay for your Vodafone bill via an Alexa skill, if I remember correctly. Yep. Yeah.
What's your thoughts, Mike?
I think you're probably looking at about a 3 to 5 year window. I think you're looking at businesses will do it themselves within, the big groups like Sky and BT and Vodafone and so forth. They'll figure out how to do that within their own systems. Then I think after that, you've got to get to a stage where the industry matures and some standards start to be agreed around those handoffs and how that could happen. And then I think, to the point, then the business has got to make a decision, do they actually want to do that? Do they want to hand these things over? And it's also, I think you've got to wait for the customers to catch up with you as well at the same time. We already have, in my mind, I've already got to the edge of some things where I'm a bit concerned that we might freak the customer out, to be honest, because we can play back and say, hey, what about this, what about that? And they go, well, how do you know that, So I think there's a little bit of both of those things, but I think technically we're still a way off it. I think standards-wise we're a long way off it. But I think it will come. I think it will come in time.
There's a lot of complications there, because if someone says, I want to upgrade Sky, are they talking about making the up there a bit prettier, or are they talking about the entity Sky? And then also you've got, for the gatekeepers of these virtual assistants that well and truly are gatekeepers, they need to decide that we're happy to open the doors to these third-party providers. The third-party providers need to be happy to have that relationship with Amazon, many of which will actually compete with Amazon. Amazon and Google, and we won't talk about Apple because there's very limited capability there, and Google's even scaling back that capability to be able to build third-party applications on it. But with Amazon specifically, we've heard from Willem around the stuff around the importance of tools like Human First to be able to get hold of data, to properly be able to train your models. Amazon doesn't give you any visibility on that data whatsoever, and so really to be able to build effective models on Alexa, you're flying blind all the time. So it's very challenging. And then the main thing, I think, more than anything else that's an inhibiting factor is that for that vision of ambient computing that's everywhere, and you can just talk to your watch and it'll do stuff for you. The access is already there, because it's already on this watch, it's already on your phones, the access is there. What's lacking is the availability of all of those things, and a large reason of why that's lacking is other business priorities, like why would BT focus on having that available on Siri, even though you can't, but Alexa or whatever, when you've got your own problems to solve. But the other thing is, it requires the business to have the infrastructure to actually be able to fulfill that stuff. And a large part of the challenge with not most, but a lot of organizations is actually they don't have the infrastructure to be able to surface that data and those APIs to be able to completely automate those tasks. Because if they did, then those tasks would already be automated in other ways. And so there's lots and lots of complexity around it. And the standards question, I don't know if you know about the Open Voice Network that's trying to address this kind of stuff. It's trying to get some standards around, interoperability, standards around privacy, standards around ethics, things like that, which is doing some really good work. But it is very, very challenging. Yeah. The other thing, I suppose, that may help in the longer term is that the EU has now released some legislation which has said that, hey, all you gatekeepers can no longer really be gatekeepers. You have to open your front end, the microphone, to everybody else. And so the likes of the BBC, who've already got their own assistant, potentially will be surfaced on these assistants in future. It's very early days, but it's essentially taken legislation to open that front door. And I'm sure within that, there's a whole bunch of challenges, but I'm wondering whether, to get your thoughts on, in order to enable some of this, whether it's adoption from businesses, whether it's kind of more innovation, what are some of the other kind of barriers to progress? And do you think that legislation for this kind of stuff is going to enable that vision that we talk about there, or not?
I think it's crucial to set some parameters. So yeah, I think it's good from that point of view. I think there's a limit to how far legislation can really influence things. At the end of the day, it's going to be driven by the twin pillars of customer experience and value. It's those two things. If those two things, boxes are ticked, things will move quickly.
Yeah. I think legislation's obviously, they take away blockers, so they kind of enable it. But I was actually thinking that there's probably an entire commercial model over here, because it's almost like when you basically, if you ask Alexa for, if you ask for ice cream, there would be competing services,
yes,
which basically would be available, and then almost just like you have a Google search experience kind of a thing, you probably have that kind of a model emerging. So I think we are not there yet, but you probably have to have, once obviously is the regulation, but kind of picking up from the twin pillars, there's then economics model somewhere which probably needs to stabilize before this kind of becomes mainstream around it. So I don't think technology as always is never the blocker. It's basically just is there enough demand for it? Do you really want Alexa to basically do everything for you today, or which one do you go for? Do you go for Alexa? Do you go for Google Assistant or something? So basically there are all those. So is there a pull? But once there is a pull, then you'll probably see these other models emerge as well.
Bringing it a bit, by the way, if you've got any questions, stick your hand up and we'll definitely get some questions. Bringing it back closer to home then, and areas that we can control within your organizations and things like that. One of the kind of, I suppose, big things that's improved over the last number of years is the tools that are available to do a lot of this stuff. If you think back to 2017, a lot of this stuff was all command line interfaces. Now there's a whole bunch of low code kind of tooling that's available. There was no tools like Human First that was allow you to interrogate data, and Botium that allows you to QA your models and stuff like that. The tooling has come on so far. What are some of the things that we need to see from our tools in the next few years to really kind of enable either better working processes, better standardization, more effective or speedier time to value? What are some of the things in the tooling do you think that we'll see change over the next few years, Smriti?
Yeah, it's a good question. I was going to say, a few years ago, I did use some kind of bot engine.ai. I don't remember what it got renamed as. So I feel like creating quickly bots was always a thing. I think it's gotten a lot better to optimize them better. But I feel like it's fantastic in the way that tools are kind of getting widely adopted. I was going to talk a little bit more on the natural language processing side. I think that side still needs some work. We're using existing data sets right now for processing Italian language from article to article suggestions. But specifically in the world of sports, for example, there's nothing really out there, and I think we need to be a little bit better at making that more open beta and making it more available publicly in terms of specific industries as well, so that language gets really enriched. I think it's still pretty basic what we've got at the moment, widely across industries. I haven't seen anything really specific that we can just pick up and use.
Are you referring there to kind of like language models that have been specifically trained on sports-related journalistic material kind of thing?
Potentially, yeah.
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 Yeah, interesting. What do you think, Somnath? What are some of the...
Yeah, I think there's always the element of data in terms of better data and, basically not having data sets which are biased. But one pain point, which is, we were talking about this earlier, is I think I've always felt that the story for the chatbot starts off after you've built it, because there's a continuous element of having to continuously, go through the utterances, and you're basically saying, okay, this has been missed, this should have been scoped. There's an element of training you're trying to basically bring in. There's an element of data drift as well. So, just basically moving away from the point where, again, I kind of go back to the model-driven approach, where yes, even in the model-driven approach, there's an element of data drift, but the maintenance effort that is kind of going into chatbots in terms of keeping it up to date, and then because as users start using it and they gain confidence, they start pushing the limit in terms of the various use cases and the utterances. So there's a continuous effort around that, and I guess if there's basically some kind of a drive towards being able to reduce that amount of effort, that I think would be a big positive. Purely from a, starting up from a chatbot perspective. And then I'm guessing we're probably on the right path in terms of the core language models. One of my pet peeves has been, so we can recognize emotion, we can recognize positive things, but recognizing things like sarcasm, especially when it comes down to customer service, etc. Those are the things we are not there yet. It'll be nice. So it's probably going to be a while before we get there, but when you kind of understand sarcasm, you're probably there where you're actually the models there. So I think there's a path forward, but yeah, life would become a little easier if we had some of those aspects included.
In all languages.
In all languages. In all languages, yeah.
I think for me, there's probably three key things. Certainly two technical pain points. One is the sort of managing and analyzing conversations after they've happened and reusing that information and recirculating that information back in. We've used machine learning to sort of gather intents, but it's still a little bit clunky. So I want to get to a point where I can get through the tens of thousands of conversations, and I just want the machine learning to basically stick flags on things and go, there might be something here, there might be something here, and then the humans can come in and do their job on top of that. That's where the real quality kicks in. The other one for me is analytics. I mean, getting sort of analytics in and around conversations and, really sort of being able to turn that into data that you can talk to the C-suite about, would be really, really handy. And I think there's a massive opportunity in that. And then the third one, I think, is just around people. I think, conversation designers is a space, if I was getting into industry again, that's the space I would go into, because you need really, really good script writers, basically, who can step into that space. A lot of people think, it's easy, you just, customer says this and you say that. But then there's persona, there's empathy, there's all these other elements that come into that. There's a lot more sophistication. So those are the three areas for me that I look at. It's two of the technical, and as I say, the third one is really, and I know CDI are doing a lot of great work, but I just wish they get more people through faster, because we need to lift that. We need that tide to lift all the boats.
Yes. I always think of it as we're kind of at the tip of a pyramid at the minute, where, the community, the conversation design community, conversational AI community, as growing as it is, it's still, globally speaking, fairly small. But over time, as more and more people kind of come into it as a profession, it'll inevitably kind of happen. But one of the interesting areas, as we've mentioned a number of times today, and Sonia, your kind of poll, I think, might have even been at the beginning of yesterday, kicked it all off, which was that the limiting factor often for people trying to implement this kind of stuff is lack of education, lack of skills. But at the same time, though, you've got a lot of technologies. Somnath, you mentioned large language models, and you've got a lot of this kind of like, if you go and look at GPT-3, or you go and look at some of the, Cohere and some of those really large language models, you could have a conversation with like a Lambda 2 about dogs or whatever it might be, and the whole conversation's managed for you, and it's generated based on the data it's ingested. And so already we're lacking conversation designers, we're lacking, AI trainers, data scientists, we're lacking skills to be able to do this stuff properly, yet the technology is kind of creeping over our shoulder and being like, actually, you know, might not need to do quite as much of this later. So I've got some views on it, but I'd be interested in all of your views in terms of, as the technology advances, how will that change the roles that are required and the skills that are required to bring this kind of stuff to life?
Just to add more to that kind of picture, I think what you mentioned around leadership, kind of understanding the analytics, I think that's massively important as well, because I don't think it's just about conversational AI, but like leveraging ML, reducing frequency of calls to call centers, whatever it is. I think leadership needs to get that onto their kind of first-hand kind of vision as well, which isn't always the case across all companies. I think that would drive the agenda of like the resources that you have in each team more effectively.
At the minute, it's very much seen as a point solution for problems. In oftentimes, like
reactive.
Yes, we've got a problem with the website. People are calling the contact center. Let's put an FAQ bot there. We've got a problem in the contact center because there's long wait times. Let's call a conversation out there. And what's not happening? It's starting to happen in some instances. I thought you were having I thought you had a question from the sound guy there. I think he was actually just yawning and falling asleep. What's lacking is turning that conversational front end into some real value for the business.
Yeah.
And in the same way as the way that you design your app needs to dictate the technology and processes behind the scenes that are required to deliver something, if it takes the company 3 days to approve a loan application, that's not really good enough in an app. When you press submit, you want something to pop up straight away that says approved or denied.
Yeah.
In order to do that, you have to go through a whole load of effort to reorchestrate your processes.
Yeah.
My thoughts are that at the moment we're trapped in this conversational AI is a UI, it's a front end. It's not seen as a transformative technology that can dictate and transform business processes and customer experience because of that lack of leadership awareness and understanding of what it can do, sort of thing. So what do you think some of the things could be done in order to continue to kind of raise awareness and educate not just the practitioners but the business leaders in terms of, you know, the value of some of this stuff? How are you approaching that at your organisations?
For me, it was really about setting up a framework within which we operate. So why are we doing this, and should we do this, and then how are we doing this? And it's really sort of explaining that across the business to say, well, this is why we're doing this. This is the purpose of this experience. You know, it is essentially to drive a better customer experience. And then bring the people in from around the business to layer in their expertise into it. So you touched on it there. You know, one of the key things is exactly around that brand experience. You know, a lot of people forget that you are essentially creating a personification of that brand. And if you misstep, you've written off brand value in an instant. And it's very easy to do, unfortunately. So I think it's really around, for me, it's setting up that framework and giving principles then for people working on the bot to say, you know, not hard and fast rules, just like guidelines, you know, guide rails really, say, look, go and be creative within this space. You know, if you're going to go and, if we're going to go and talk with a customer about their billing, ask them up front if they're comfortable with having that conversation, you know, and say, hey, I can go and check on that for you. Is that okay? You know, and then oh yeah, great, fine, go ahead, you know. But then you've got to, as I say, you've got to think about the customer experience of it. You've got to think about, okay, does this represent as a brand what we want to do? Is that the sort of thing we want to present? It's all those sort of layers, and that's, you know, again, you can build all the technology you want, but at the end of the day, you've still got to have a human who comes in and says, hey, this is how we're going to operate this thing, and this is why we're operating this thing.
How have you approached it, Somnath? How have you approached translating that front end to business value in order to encourage further scale? So
I think you're absolutely right. And this is the nature of the beast, that conversation by nature is the interface. This probably kind of falls back to kind of core product management in terms of, you know, the way you're kind of defining why you're doing it. I know today probably most of the chatbots or this thing is more of a cost prevention exercise in terms of I have, you know, 80% containment, so I've kind of saved that amount of effort, and therefore we're kind of going with it. But then there is an element as the kind of as the journeys evolve, you're kind of going one step further in terms of improving the lifetime value as well. So you're trying to kind of solve a problem, but then because you've kind of engaged, you're kind of getting some more information. So the way we've kind of defined it is obviously, you have your North Stars, and, for us, you have, on one hand, got to pay the bill. So you've got your lifetime value improvement through conversation in terms of people who chat with us. Is there a lifetime value impact? Have you improved the quality of the experience? And additionally, have you kind of, improved the CSAT or the NPS? Once you kind of start putting in those kind of drivers for it, I think what it does, it'll still not solve the problem, but what it does, it kind of puts the pressure from the back end perspective. Because, imagine this, where you could previously write a letter and then you were okay to wait for 5 days to get a response. As opposed to now, when you're talking to a person, you expect an immediate response. So because you have the interface available, the user's expectation is exactly as you said. I'm expecting an immediate response as opposed to 30-second or 30-minute response. So I think that will kind of drive the back-end systems in terms of now that we have this interface and the users are basically looking for this kind of a pull, the back-end, the endpoints and the API layer basically needs to become more mature. So I think it's setting the expectation and then almost kind of driving the back end, starting off from the front end. I think that's the way we are seeing it progress, and seems to be working so far.
Yeah. What about you, Smriti? How are you going about educating stakeholders about the value of this and getting further support?
It's quite interesting because I think from our perspective, so I don't know how many Sky Sports app users we have in the crowd, but it is like a content-based app. And so we have a massive team of editors in Sky Sports that does an incredible job at writing the content as well as curating it. And we want to leverage kind of machine learning and kind of understanding what our users want to complement the editor's roles by doing better content curation. So actually, it's been a little bit of an educational piece internally for us more than for the user's sake, because at the end of the day, it might not even change that much from the user's perspective, but we're taking control outside from the editors to do the content curation through learning from our users and having that more personalized experience. So my top 3 content is what I care about versus what editors have prioritized as top 3. So yeah, I think that's basically an ongoing conversation at the moment, and it's going really well because we're adding value to the editor's roles as well as to our users. I think another part that's quite interesting to discuss, and I don't know if we'll have time to go into it, but is...
We've got until 5:30, so...
Yeah, I can see. It's basically around whether, we should, my role is a little bit different because we're not necessarily working on a conversational interface, so it's just like the Sky Sports app in general, is having data scientists embedded within our team or having a team of data scientists that work across different products. I'm still not sure which one is the best case scenario, but I think the key role number 1 is definitely aligning to goals and having a clear why on why we're doing this.
Nice. Has anybody got any questions for the panel? Yeah?
So kind of going off of a little bit of what we talked about in the last couple minutes. So I'd be curious what so I think you explained a little bit of the business case for the two of you. What are the business cases you all use the bot for? Okay. And a huge part of what the future of conversational AI will be, what is a lot of what the future of the business goals and values will be, sort of to your point about the 2 pillars. So can you explain to us a bit, for all 3 of you, where do you think from the pulse you have on your business, where 5 years from now, what you're envisioning for your companies with
5 years from now?
conversational AI?
Yeah. Let me kind of start off on that one. So I think the way we are seeing, or we've kind of gone about conversational AI is very different from the traditional piece in terms of cost saving. We are basically kind of seeing, because we are in the business of job tech, and when you're kind of looking for a job, as I mentioned earlier, it's a very emotional aspect as well. And you want to you prefer having a conversation than having to fill up a form and then wait for results. And then if you're not basically getting the outcome that you're looking for, there's basically an emotional low element to it. So to us, this is not necessarily or this is not even close to a cost saving exercise. Yes, there is an element where we kind of started off with the human to human, just to basically so that we could get our North Star in terms of where the conversation should go. But ultimately, the idea is to kind of have conversational AI as a fairly central way of engaging with the users through conversations where you're actually driving the lifetime value for the customer. And you're basically, and that obviously will impact your kind of, top lines as well. And, as we talk about, so conversations will probably remain a central part of that piece. How that conversation kind of manifests itself, whether it remains within a chatbot, whether it becomes mainstream, whether it becomes voice, whether it basically has a digital human interface to it, I think that's where the technology and the user adoption will happen. But I see conversational AI not just as a means to kind of save some cost or basically reduce the effort on customer service, but it'll become a fairly central interface for core business metrics like your top line as well. That's where at least I think you'll probably see things, sectors like job tech, etc. Especially I can talk about job tech because we are in that. In terms of the emotional aspect, I think that's one big tick that conversation has over any other digital interface. So yeah.
I think for me, we really started with a very simple vision, which is, how do we make it so that the bot, whether it's spoken or written, how do we make it so that the bot is the customer's preferred point of contact? And then everything cascades off the back of that, basically. What they want to ask, how they want to ask it, do they expect proactive, is it purely reactive? And then off the back of that, you can figure out what are the economics that you wrap around it, where's the business value, and all of those things are easier to start from that single point and then, as I say, cascade down. And also, it's a very easy thing to transmit at any level of the business. You can say, well, what are you doing? We're making it so that customers want to use this. Oh, okay. And then, everything else can follow behind that. And also, it helps people when they're developing, because they can sort of think, well, does this fall within those, within that vision? And if it does, great, let's go for it.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, I think for the Sky Sports app, it's a little bit different just because we don't have that conversational interface. But if you consider, action, reaction, and we want the Sky Sports app to be the home of the most engaged sports fans. So we want to be kind of proactive with their needs as they arrive onto the app. So how do we get them to stay longer on the app? How do we get them to visit more content? So yeah, I guess there isn't that kind of conversation happening in a text space or voice space with the user. But I think if I was working on a conversational UI experience, I think what's really interesting is when you talk about in 5 years, so forgetting today's goals, I think the concept of conversational UI is very conversation-based. And I don't think every conversation needs to have a goal. So I think in 5 years, I'm almost expecting conversational UI experiences to not have a goal and be more human-style conversations, like a dialogue. When we start a conversation, we don't always have a goal, right? So I think that's the direction I'm seeing it go in.
Interesting. Has anyone got any questions, by the way, while we stick your hand up if you do? Yeah, it's interesting. The way that, so Sky itself as an entity is using a lot of conversational AI technology, the Sky Q box and the TV and stuff
absolutely.
like that. Conversational interfaces. I'd be very surprised if there wasn't a chatbot or something like that, or something in the IVR. Same thing with BT, and I think if I think about the maturity of an organization's kind of conversational AI use of that and how it matures, I think a good example of where I think things are going, I'd be interested to get your thoughts, is that if you look at Capital One, so Capital One have got the Eno assistant, and it's in the app as a voice assistant and a chatbot. It's on their website as a chatbot. You can speak to Eno in the IVR if you call. It does, I think it's just got an SMS service. If you email Capital One, you'll get a response from Eno. If you buy something online, Eno will facilitate that payment with a Google Chrome shortcut. And so the way that Capital One is progressing is that every touch point that it has with a customer has Eno at the front end of it, regardless of whether it's conversational or not.
Yeah.
The shortcut that facilitates payments isn't a conversational channel, but it's Eno that's the trusted thing to do that. And my kind of philosophy is that there will be a point in time when somebody joins Capital One because of Eno, so it's a strategic advantage for the company. But not only will they maybe join because of Eno, but Eno is all they will know.
Yeah. Less
And-
than Capital One.
Exactly. So at which point does the Eno assistant become the brand? And that's kind of the way that I'm kind of thinking about this. And if you look at Toby, and I've got some
I know,
Vodafone team here, Toby's everywhere, you know. And the more you interact with Vodafone, the more you interact with Toby, and the more that Toby scales and can handle more use cases on more channels, at what point does Vodafone essentially become Toby? And so my philosophy is that all of the front-end touch points for businesses, not necessarily within the next 5 years, I wouldn't want to put a time frame on it because things take longer than you would imagine, but the first port of call for the mature businesses will be a conversational AI. And it will be doing not just deflection, not just FAQs, but it will be handling core business processes. I'm curious as to whether you concur with that or whether you have a difference in how you see things unfold.
No, I'd agree with that 100%. I think again, I think it's certainly within 5 years, probably more like 3 years. And I think to your point around the brand is very important, but I think it's a bit like Apple and iPhone. Everyone knows an iPhone, but it's still Apple at the end of the day. And I think that will be the way that, you know, Toby within Vodafone and Amy within EE and so on and so forth. I think those, if they're managed correctly, they'll just add value to the overall brand. They'll, you know, lift things up as long as they work and so forth. But I think it'll happen sooner rather than later. And yes, certainly, as I mentioned, you know, I think it's a matter of breaking down and looking at it holistically and saying, well, what do we want the customer to experience? All right, well, we've got this piece of the jigsaw over here, we've got this piece of the jigsaw over there. Don't sort of make the customer jump from, you know, place to place to place. Build the seamlessness between them for them. And that's, you know, that's very easily said and very hard to do. But again, as I say, I think if you go back and start with a simple vision, you can start to break it down, you can start to show the value, you can start to get the backing from your business to make those things happen.
Would you concur?
You know what's interesting is when you mentioned kind of Toby and Capital One's but it's almost putting a face to the brand. And actually, so far, there wasn't a face to the brand, right? It was just a brand. So we've been talking a lot about the lack of human presence in virtual agents, but actually we just said now there's a face to the brand. So actually we're adding even more human elements than there was before. So
it's the emotional investment that goes in, because the moment you have a conversation, same goes with Alexa, right? I mean, you at times I check myself being, you know, if I say something very curtly, you know, it's basically okay, then you almost feel apologetic because you're talking to something. So there's an element of the more you kind of have conversations, there's an emotional element. And you know, if it's whether it's Toby or whether it's, you know, any other entity, you're basically then building that connection with that entity, which then translates to the brand.
In a new way, because you wouldn't relate to Amazon the same way you relate to Alexa. It is a name of a person a lot more than it is a name of a brand.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. And to answer your question, I think the reason why I guess all of us are here is because we're all convinced that, you know, when it comes down to conversation is obviously the easiest way for anyone to interface. There's no training, there is nothing, no guidelines that you provide to the user. So conversations will be a mechanism, and as technology happens and depending upon the user pool, it'll definitely, I think it's just a matter of time.
I think the biggest challenge is we do take conversation for granted. We forget about the mechanics and, you know, the lifetime of experience that goes to build into a conversation, you know, all the little nuances, you know, the physical gestures, the sounds, the other bits and pieces, you know. And I think that's why I come back and I made that point about having really, really good conversational designers. They have to be able to understand that and bring that to bear. And then you also have to have, you know, an ethics framework to wrap around it. I mean, the Google thing, you know, I think way stepped over the line as far as I was concerned, because it didn't make clear what it was up front.
You're talking about
brilliantly worked, technically great execution, ethically, oh my God, you know, forget it.
I thought the entire thing was going to be about Lambda, so finally we got to Lambda.
Yeah, we finally got to Lambda. Yeah, we didn't get a chance to get to Lambda. We didn't get to Lambda. We didn't get to digital humans. I thought one of you would have threw the metaverse into that conversation, which we didn't do. But I think the last thing I would leave us with is we're still talking about it as bots. We're still saying bots all the time. And I think that's also symptomatic of where we are as an industry, is that we're still building bots, which is small things that solve specific problems. Whereas I think what we'll also see over the next few years is that language will begin to change, and we'll start talking about them more as assistants, more as digital
entity,
assistants,
yeah.
AI assistants, whatever you want to call them. Because even if a bot is fulfilling a task or providing a certain function, it's still assisting the user to get something done. And I think that it's semantic and it's a bit pathetic, but I think the way that we describe things can often have connotations as to what they are. And as we keep calling them bots, it makes them sound a little bit dumb.
I think Toby's an AI concierge.
Concierge, there you go. White glove concierge service.
That's it.
So I think we'll start to talk about them more as assistants as we start to join these bots together into a more kind of harmonious.
But they don't necessarily need to be assistants as well. Maybe it is just, a support, like just someone to talk to. It doesn't necessarily need to have that goal.
We talk about them as guides.
Yeah, we
That's
think
the language we use. We don't use bots anymore. We talk about guides because that's what they're there to do. They're there to help you get to a certain place, whether it's to complete a task or it's to find a piece of information.
We actually call them as coaches. So it's a job search coach, and it's almost like a buddy kind of a thing, which is who's there to think for you. So I think all of us flinch a little anytime someone says bot, and then we correct them and say it's an AI.
It's a 3-letter word. It's easy to use.
I think what we're building are experiences, and we'll come up with lots of different names for them. But essentially, that's what we'll come back to, which is what is the experience we want the customer, the person on the other end to have.
Human to non-human.
Yeah. What's the best way to execute on that?
Yeah, nice. Well, thank you so much, Smriti, Somnath, and Mike. Would you believe it is 5:30? The bar is open, and it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.